All right. Welcome back, the genius. Welcome back. Welcome back. So, in this session, let's take a look at radio buttons and also the button elements in HTML. We take a look at radio button and the button elements. First of all, let's take a look at radio button. All right. So, radio buttons in HTML are input elements that allow users to select one option from a group of predefined choices. So whenever you have, you want a user to select one option from a lot of other choices, you use the radio button. So that means if they select one, if they want to select another one, the other one they have selected before will be deselected and the new one will get selected, okay? So they can only select just one. Meanwhile, for the checkboxes, if you have more than one options, all of them can be checked. They can check more than one. But for the radio button, it's just only one that can be selected at a time. So they are commonly used in forms when you want users to pick a single choice from a list. You have a list of options, but you just want users to just take one. So that is where you use radio button, okay? So they are part of the input element family, and they are widely used in forms for surveys, preferences, and similar use cases. Now, this radio button is also an input element, but the type now is going to be radio, okay? So just like checkbox is also an input element, and the type is checkbox, okay? So now the basic syntax, a radio button is defined using the input element with the type radio attribute. So the input element, you can see here, it's an input element, but the type is radio. And it can also have a name like to group it, just like we had for the checkbox. It can also have a name to group it, and it can also have value. All right. So now, what are the key attributes of a radio button? The first one is the type. All right. So the type, this is an attribute of it, and it has to be radio. It specifies the input is a radio button. So wherever you see an input element and the type is radio, that means it's going to be a radio button. We are going to see how it looks like. Okay. So we also have the name. Now, this name is used to it groups radio buttons together. So if you have all the choices you want the users to select one from, they have to be in group, and all of them would have the same value to their name attribute. So only one button in the same name group can be selected at a time. Okay. So let me show you. Let me just show you. Here we have. Okay. Here we have this form. We have this element. So if I say, of course, it's going to be inside the form. All right. And then I have a group of inputs, and their type is radio. All right. And the type is radio. And I can give it name as I can say scale. I can just say skills. I can call it skills. It can be anything. And I would close. Okay. Of course, I could actually put this thing in a label. I can put it in a label for accessibility. Okay. I could say JavaScript. Then this one comes here. I could pick this. I could just have multiple of it. Okay. So, but what I didn't have the first time here is the value. Okay, I can say the value is JavaScript. Okay. And here I could say HTML. And the value here will also be HTML. I can say CSS. And the value is CSS. Then I can say TypeScript. Okay, I can say TypeScript, and the value here is going to be TypeScript. All right. So if I save this and open it in a browser, now let's see how it looks like. You can see. So if I can select, okay, and now I have options. Now let's say I want to check, I'm asking the user to select the skill they are most conversant with or they are most in love with. So they can only select one at a time, just one. You cannot select more than one, all right? So this is how the radio button works. It actually gives the user options to select from, okay? A list of options to select from, and that's how the radio button works. So let's go back to, now we have the name. You can see how I made the name. The name, all of them will have the same name, and that is how they are being grouped together as one. So they can also have value, just like you have seen. So the value is what, when we submit this form to the server, the value is what is sent to the server. Just like every other one, even the checkbox also have the value. Okay, so each radio button should have a unique value. Okay, each, you can see the one that we had here, all of them had a unique value. So if I go back to it, all of them had a unique value. Okay, look at it, all of them had a unique value, but they have the same name. They have the same name value. Okay, they have the same name, but they have a unique values here. So another attribute is also checked. Now you can actually check the radio button, pre-select it. So with this checked attribute, the radio button is pre-selected, just like we have in the check box. If I say, okay, by default, this is going to be checked. All right. So if I say it's going to be checked, if I go back to the browser, you see that the JavaScript is selected by default. But I can still come here like this and change it. But by default, the JavaScript is selected because we checked it. All right, it was checked. Okay, so the checked attribute pre-selects a radio button. Okay. We also have the ID. All right, it links the radio button with a label for better accessibility. Now, if you watch, what I did here was I used the automatic association. All right, but if I wasn't using this, I could actually give it an ID and then give the label the 4 attributes to point to the ID of this radio button. But here I'm using automatic implicit association. Okay. All right. So you can also disable it. If you disable it, it prevents the user from selecting the button. So you already see how this thing is. Any element that you disable like that, the user can no longer select it or interact with it. So if I go on and say this TypeScript is disabled, all right. If I go on and save it and open the browser, you can see that, you see, I cannot select it. I'm clicking on it. I can't select it. It is disabled. But I can select the other one, but I can't select it. It is disabled. Okay. So that is it. All right. So you can also say it is required. And once you mark it required, it ensures that at least one option in the group is selected before the form is submitted. We have seen this required a lot of times. So if you want to make sure that the user has to give you at least, if you want to make sure that the user selects that radio button, you mark it as required. If not, it will not be submitted to the server. Okay. So what is the behavior of radio buttons? Now, there is something we call single selection. Only one button in a group can be selected at a time. All right, only one button in a group that has the same name, they can be selected at a time. You cannot select more than one radio button. Okay, if you have 5 radio buttons in a group, only one can be selected at a time. Now, the default state, okay, the radio button has a default state, and by default, no button is selected unless the checked attribute is used. So by default, no button is selected unless the checked attribute is used. So if you, the default state is unchecked, it is not, the default state check is actually false. Okay, so single selection and also the default state is it is not selected unless you mark it, you use the checked attribute, okay? Then let's talk about accessibility. Accessibility is crucial for making radio buttons user-friendly for everyone. Always make sure, in as much as we have not talked about accessibility, but you can actually see how big accessibility is, how big role it is playing, okay? So including those using screen readers or keyboard navigation, okay? So we are going to see more of this when we start talking about accessibility. So what are the best practices? Always use the label element, just like we have used already. So linking labels to radio buttons with the 4 attribute improves usability. So it's either you use the 4 attribute or you use the implicit association. All right. So, but any of them makes sense. It actually improves the usability of your radio button. Okay. So you can also provide a visible and programmatic grouping using a fuse set and legend. Okay, something like this. You can put them in fuse set like this. Okay. This would actually improve the accessibility. So you have the fuse set, okay, and you have this legend. So you put this, look at the radio button, they are all inside of this fuse set, okay? Now we're still going to talk about the fuse set and the legend elements later on. Okay, we are going to talk about them later on, okay? So you can also use tab index for custom navigation. We would also talk about tab index, okay? We'll also talk about tab index when we talk about keyboard navigation, all right? So somebody can actually use the keyboard and they use the tab index. So I'm not going to explain it here, but to improve accessibility of your radio buttons, first of all, use labels. Secondly, put them in a few sets, group them, programmatically group them, and then use tab index for custom navigation. So for validation, radio buttons can be validated using HTML and JavaScript. So for HTML validation, you would have to use the required attributes to enforce selection. So if you want to make sure that users actually select, you want to make sure that they select the radio button, you have to use the the attribute required. That is that one is HTML validation. Okay, so that is HTML validation. So you can validate the radio button using HTML validation or JavaScript validation. So if you want to use HTML validation, that means you have to use the required keyword. Most of the elements that we have discussed so far, if you want to validate them, if you want to make sure that the user gives you a value or selects it, you have to use the required keyword. So for JavaScript, you can also validate it. Here we are writing a function, all right? And we are getting elements by name. We are getting all the elements by name and we get them. So this is just a function. So if you don't know JavaScript, you might not get this. So DOM manipulation, we are actually getting all the radio buttons because all of them have a name. So we are getting all of them by name. And here we have it. So we are creating a variable here is checked. So we are looping through all of them. So for all of them, we are checking, is the radio button checked? If the radio button is checked, then we are reassigning this is checked variable to true. And if it is checked, we will break out, okay? Once it is checked, we will break out of this for loop, okay? And if it's checked, if not checked, we are alerting, all right? So this is just JavaScript, okay? So we are checking we are looping through all of them. And once we get just one that is checked, we are okay with it. So once we get it, we'll break out of the loop and we can now go on to check if it's checked is true. And if it's checked if it is false, because we are negating the value of is checked. If it is false, we are alerting. All right, and we are returning false, else we are returning true. So this is how you can use JavaScript to validate your radio button, okay? So what are the best practices? Always group related radio buttons using the name attribute. Always group related radio buttons using the name attribute. Use the label element for accessibility. Validate inputs using both HTML and JavaScript. Always validate your inputs, okay? Consider using modern styling tools like Accent Color for lightweight customization. And that is all for radio buttons, okay? That is all for radio buttons. Basically, radio buttons are used to give the users an option to select one option from a list. So let's talk about buttons in HTML, because buttons is something that you see everywhere. So if you look at this platform that you're using, there are a lot of buttons everywhere. Everywhere, all those things that you're clicking and they are taking you to one place or the other. Most of them are buttons, okay? So let's take a look at buttons. Now, buttons in HTML are essential elements that allow users to interact with web pages. They are essential elements that allow users to interact with web pages. Okay, so they are commonly used to submit forms, to trigger events, or perform specific actions. They are used to submit forms. After the user fill the form, they will now click on submit. All right, the user might click on a button to trigger an event, all right, or perform specific actions. So when you see, as you're watching this video, immediately after this video, you're seeing two buttons. Go to previous session, go to next session. Those are buttons. And once you click it, it is triggering an event. Once you click it, it will take you to the next section. So that's triggering an event or performing a specific action. So that's how we use button, okay? So this is how button is used. Okay, as simple as this, button, and click me. So if I go, let me show you how button looks. I could just have button here and just something like this. Click me, all right? And if I go to the browser, you can see how it looks, okay? It says click me, okay? It says click me, and if I click it, it is automatically submitting the button, it is automatically submitting the form for us, okay? Because it's inside a form. Okay, so common button elements. There are a lot of button elements. So let's take a look at one by one and discuss them. So we have this button, the one that you have just seen here, the button element. It's a versatile button that can contain text, images, or other HTML content. You see this button that you see here, it can contain text. This one contains text, it can contain images or other HTML content. So instead of me putting click me here, I can put an image here. All right, so we are going to see it in action actually, or it can also contain any other HTML element. Okay, so now we also have the input. We also have another type of button that is an input element. So this one will not contain any, it will not contain any other text, images, or anything like that. It doesn't have, it will not contain any other HTML element. So if I go now, I can say this. If my button is not going to be containing anything, I could just use this one and I could say type is button. Do you understand? And then I could give it value. Okay, I can say, I can also say click me. All right, so this is the value the user is going to see. So if I go to my browser now, you can see. Now, this one is the normal button this first one is the one that can contain other HTML content, text, images, and other HTML content. But this one, the second one, does not contain anything. Okay, so that is it. We have already seen two types. The first one that can contain other HTML content. The second one that does not contain any other HTML content. We also have the input submit. Now, this one is always used for submitting a form. All right. The difference between this and this is that the submit will, whenever you click it, the browser understands that it's used to submit a form. So I can go back and say, I have this. I can say inputs, and I can say type is submits. okay, and the value is submit, okay. And if I go to my browser now, I can see it. You can see. So if I click it, it's going to submit the form for us, okay? So these are the different kinds of buttons we have. We also have the reset. So whenever you have a reset button, the reset button will reset form inputs to their default values. Now let me show you how we use this one. Now let's say I have inputs and the type is reset. So what does this guy do? I will give it a value of reset, okay? So if I have, now if it would, look at what it says, it would reset form inputs to their default values. Now when we go to our browser, we have this as, we already have this in selected. So if I click reset, okay, so no, this is not the best example. Okay, let me even try it again and see if I will get what I'm trying to explain. You can see. Now look at it. This is the default value. This is the one that was selected. So, but I am coming to select CSS now, all right? And if I click reset, it is going to take it back to the default value, which is, you can see. So if I select HTML and click reset, it will take it back. So let me give you a better example. I can have an input element. By default, it is the test element. So if I go on and open my browser, I'm going to have this. So I can type blah, blah, blah here. And once I click reset, you can see it resets it to its default value. So if you want, this short, when you're creating a form, you should actually provide it for this reset for your users, because they will need it in case they want to reset they as they are typing, they just want to clear everything that they have already typed. You can use reset for this. So this is the type we have. So these are the different types of buttons. Okay, we'll also see more as we go on. So what are the attributes of buttons? The first attribute is the type that we have already seen. All right, and the values can be button. The value is button by default. Now this defines the button type. Okay, so we also have submit. Okay, we have already seen this. We have reset. Okay, so also we have name as an attribute used to identify the button. Every element has this name attribute, so the button is also inclusive. All right, we have the value. Now this is what the user is going to see. When you give value, you have already seen me use value. So the value is what the user is going to see. Okay, so if I come back here, you can see that the value here is what the user is seeing. That's what we have here. Okay. So we also have the autofocus. Now this focuses the button automatically when the page loads. So if I go on and give autofocus to this button, all right. If I go on and say this button, I'll give it autofocus. Okay. And I go to my browser. By default, the button, you can see it here. You can see it is focused. Do you understand? It is focused. By default, it is focused. All right, look at it. It is focused by default. So if you want it to be focused, all you have to do is give it this focus attribute. I can also take this focus out and say, I want to give it to this other click me. I can say autofocus. Okay, so if I save and go to the browser, you will see this one is now focused. So by default, it will automatically focus the button. So we also have you can also give it, you can also have the form attribute. Now normally when you have a form, you will have a button inside of it for the submit button. But in case you don't have the submit button inside of the form, you can actually give the form an ID. Then the button, you will now give the button the form the form attribute of this button will not be the ID of this form, just like we use the for attribute in a label against the ID of an input element. Here, we are using form attribute on the button against the ID of the form. So if I go to show you in code how it works, now I can take this guy out of here, all right? But if I want to associate it with this form, I'm going to give this form an ID, and I can just say form. Then I will now come here and give this form, all right? Then the value will be the ID of that form, all right? So this is not associated with this form, but normally it is not inside of it. So they are separate, but normally we actually put our button inside of our form. So if there is any need for you not to put it inside of it, you can actually use this to also associate it with the form. So if you go ahead and click this button, it's going to submit the form. So let's go ahead and I'm going to take this back to what we have before. Now you can see the form, this submit button is outside of this form. So if I click blah 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 here, and I select TypeScript, I select CSS. If I click on this submit, remember this submit button is not inside of the form. Normally, it is not supposed to submit the form because it's not inside of the form. But since we have associated it using the form attribute on the button and the ID attribute on the form, if I click it, it is going to submit it. You can see it has submitted it. Okay, so that's how it works. So accessibility best practices, use clear and descriptive text. Always use the text that you use on your button, whether the value or the text, always use descriptive text. Ensure keyboard navigation is possible. All right, provide alternative text for buttons with images. Let's say you're going to use images on your button. Provide an alternate attribute for it, just like whenever you're using images, you should provide the auth text for it. So you can also customize your button. All right, you can customize the button to have images. I don't know if I have any image. So inside of this button, you would have an image. So let me see if I have any image in this my folder. Okay, I have an image. Okay, so I can actually this button that I have here, I can actually have an image here. All right, but always use your alt text. Okay, always use your alt text. All right, then I'll provide the source of the image. And the source is, let me say, img.png. I could also give it a width, let's say width of 50, and the height of 50. So let us see what we have there. So now we are customizing this button, and of course, this button can contain other HTML elements. So if I save and go to the browser, you can see, all right? You can see it has an image. So it has an image. This is the image. So you can actually customize it. You can make it look better, actually. You can make it look better. Okay, you can make it look better. So you can also have href. You can also have anchor tags to be images, to be buttons. So, but all you have to do is to give it a role of button. So you can make anchor tags, links to be buttons. So let's say I go on now, and I have an anchor tag here. Okay, to avoid confusion, let me just take all of them out. Then I have an anchor tag. And I say click me. I say click me. Then I'll give it a href. Sorry, I'll give it a href of anything. And I'll give it a row of button. So these are different rows that you can give it, but I'm giving it a row of button. Okay, so if I save, go to browser. Now it is a button now. Okay, the road is button. So in as much as it's still has that attribute that look as an anchor link, okay, but it hasn't a role of button. So this is another type of customization of buttons, okay? So we also have the image buttons, all right? So you can actually have input type as image and give it a source. So if we go to the browser, to our code, I can actually have this input. Okay, I can have inputs, and I will say the type is image, but then I should provide a source, and I'm going to use img.png, and I could give it a value of click me. Okay. Maybe I don't even need to give it a value. Let's see. The source, and okay, then you give it an auth value. Always remember, whenever you're doing anything that has to do with image, always give it an auth value. I can say the auth value is click me. Okay. So if I go on now to the browser, okay, you can see how big it is. It's because I didn't provide any, I didn't give it width and height. So I can just do width to be 50, height to be, sorry, I'll give it height to be 50. So if I save and go to the browser, oh, sorry, if I go to my browser, you can see it is a button now. So these are different customizations. Okay, you can also do the submit and the reset buttons. We have already seen all these ones. Okay, and this is where we draw the curtain. Thank you very much. Okay, please, if you do not understand something, if you're confused about something, just click the chat button on the right on this screen so that you can actually chat your instructor and ask your questions for more clarifications. Thank you very much. Make sure you do your assignment. Make sure you write your test, and we'll see you in the next section. Have a great day.